I think there are quite a few people waiting for link. They have not received for link, so they are calling me.
Sir, good morning, sir. Sir, you have sent links to the participant who are registered through our Google Forms. You have sent links to all the participants, sir.
Okay. Yeah. I know they might be waiting, in their WhatsApp group.
That can be possible, sir. So, good morning to all respected dignitaries from different parts of our country. Myself, Dr. Shailendra Kumar Tiwari, Dean Veterinary College, Anura, Chhattisgarh Kamdhenu Vishwavidyalaya, welcomes you all on this auspicious occasion of national webinar on topic Science Behind Vaccination and Disease Control in India, organized by CGKV Durg. On this occasion, first of all, I am highly thankful to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. L.P. Dakshinkar sir, who is the chief patron and the national of this national webinar and a true motivator for our institute. I welcome you. I welcome the eminent speaker, Dr. Abdul Samad sir, former Dean, Bombay Veterinary College and Director Instruction, MAPSU Nagpur. We are grateful, sir, that you have consented for this webinar, please. Sir, the field of veterinary vaccinology has been enormously expanded over last decade due to induction of wide range of advanced vaccines. It is said that prevention is always better than cure. Prophylactic vaccination against diseases is economic approach for control of diseases. In the current context of COVID-19, this topic is more relevant since whole world is trying to develop a successful vaccine against it. Vaccination is basically aimed at triggering the immune system to produce antibodies to fight infection, while all other diseases can be vaccinated against it. All potential infectious diseases threats should be identified, find suitable vaccination program, develop and combat those challenges. Therefore, disease prevention by vaccination is one of the most important tools for preventing disease and reducing the economic loss. Now, a brief biodata about the speaker. Dr. Abdul Samad is formerly Dean, Bombay Veterinary College and Director of Instruction, MAPSU Nagpur. He completed BVSc from Bombay Veterinary College, MVSc in Veterinary Medicine. Then he joined Assistant Professor at Perbani Veterinary College in 1977 and rose to become Associate Professor in 1980. He was awarded Commonwealth Fellowship to pursue PhD from Ontario Veterinary College, University of Gulf, Canada. After his return, he joined Bombay Veterinary College as professor and later became head of the department and dean of the college. As dean and director of instructions, he also had additional charge of associate dean Nagpur Veterinary College. Sir, he has built many institutions with financial support from the Department of Atomic Energy. He has established India's first nuclear medicine center to provide scintigraphy and whole body imaging facilities to researchers involved in novel drug development. He also established a cardiac center, echocardiography unit, dialysis unit, canine blood bank at Bombay Veterinary College. Dr. Samad has 15 patents to his credit, out of which few are already in the market like QR coded tags, HF RFID tags, Novivaz, Intas, Novadip, Safe and PMD Belgium, V1, V2 Undi spray and Blue Entrap. He developed several cloud server-based software platform commercially available in India and other countries. He has won several awards. Notable among them are India Country Development Marketplace Award from the World Bank, E-India Award of the Government of India for Novel IT Initiative, Agriculture, Distinguished Veterinarian Award, and Canadian Merck Domes Research Award. Now, sir, before we start this national webinar, I invite our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. Dakshinkar sir, to shower his blessings for this webinar. Sir, Dakshinkar sir, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Really, we are privileged to have with us today Dr. Abdul Samad, ex-Director Extension and a scientist par excellence. Now, the COVID-19 has created a pivot for all of us in the sense face-to-face interactions are out of memory presently. So in this context, I requested Dr. Samath to have some enlightenment on a very appropriate topic in today's context, that is the vaccinology. And I am really thankful to you, sir, for accepting our invitation immediately. I am fortunate to work with him for quite some time, and he was really a guiding spirit for me in many respects. As we all know, there is a paradigm shift in the veterinary science. Earlier, when we were the students, the focus was on the curative medicine, but now the focus is shifted towards the preventive medicine. Why is it so? Because all of us, we know that there are certain diseases which are endemic to our country, and then there are certain diseases which usually occur in epidemic form. But to me, this line is very subtle between the endemic and the epidemic diseases. And as we know that all these diseases cause a huge economic losses. So in order to prevent these economic losses and thereby to increase the economic gains of the livestock speaker, preventive vaccination program should be effective. And in this context, we are very obliged that we have a very pertinent speaker on this topic with us today. As regards the endemic diseases are concerned, as we all know, the FMD is there, the HS is there, the BQ is there, then there are certain poultry diseases are there. But in spite of all, we fail to eradicate these diseases. Even eradication is a very broad term. I will say that we have failed to control also the diseases. So in this context, I invite, without taking much of your time, I request Dr. Samath sir to please enlighten the gathering about the science behind vaccination. Thank you. Thank you.
So can I share my presentation now?
Yeah, sir.
Over to me now.
Sir, please start.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Can you see my screen now, everyone?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Dakshinkar, as well as Dean of the college. I'm also thankful to all the participants who are virtually meeting for this webinar. Now the topic of my presentation on vaccinology, and that this topic is relevant because of current COVID outbreak. Therefore, I thought that if we can have a lecture, if we can have what is the science behind how the vaccines work, how the disease control program can be planned, where vaccination and surveillance becomes an integral part of it. So that's what I'm going to discuss today. And since we introduce the biology or the molecular biology behind the infections, behind the vaccine, how these work, so that we have some advanced understanding of it. I'm not going to touch what is already known, because then to update you and add on certain concepts which have been evolving. This is what is my plan: consequences of pathogen, any immune response, what is the chronology, vaccine and vaccination. To note and talk and brief about disease control concepts, especially considering the national plan on FMD as well as in brucellosis. Exactly how this should be implemented and what should be done. Now this is what I have tried to explain. The whole process of the infection and the disease. As you can see, the bacteria and virus, the pathogens, they have to get into the body, and that is through port of entry. And these entries are natural, body or any points that are open to environment. So, for example, you have mouth, you have nose, and then you have reproductive tract and the terminal intestinal part. So those are the parts that are directly open to the environment from where pathogens can enter. But there are also, like we say, skin, etc. But unless some abrasion to the skin, the pathogens will not easily enter. So a bacteria or virus has to come to the port of entry, and through port of entry, it has to enter the body. So here again, when it comes to port of entry, you have local immunity. So you can see, nature has designed body in such a way that it has tried to see that it's just like any country, on those borders, armies, that are protecting the country. So the same analogy, you can think that at every point, obstacles to pathogens. Brain, once it comes to port of entry, then the pathogen gets attached to the target cell. Now, this is a very specific mechanism, and this is where the because there are pathogens which will only disease related to urinary tract or certain cells. Whether a pathogen gets a process of internalization of pathogen, and mostly what happens, these pathogens, when they are getting internalized, then they fool the body system, and then that's how this is a stage where we call it invasion. So this is very important to understand that invasion, and after invasion you have infection. That means once it is invaded, then there are local mechanisms to take care of. Sometimes the viruses, even after entry into the cell, may not be able to multiply, and therefore the infection will stop there. Or the virus or the bacteria which has entered into the body is processed internally, and how it is processed, that we'll see later on, is processed, and then it results in immune response rather than infection, and then it comes to infection, and then after infection, then there is a disease. So currently, when in COVID, the the case fatality rate, the cases, the infection positive cases are being reported. There is a lot of confusion, because people or those who are reporting, in the social media are not able to differentiate what exactly is disease, what exactly is infection, and what exactly is the invasion. But we know that any pathogen which is getting an entry into the body is not going to produce infection. Pathogen which is able to establish itself into the cell and cause infection may not be able to cause the disease. So the disease causation becomes a very small proportion of the exposure. So I believe what people are talking about today in COVID, there are so many lakhs of people have been infected or have been picked up as infected by PCR. So there the problem is PCR will pick up only the presence of the virus or the bacteria or its components. It doesn't tell you whether the patient is really infected, and that's why you find that there are reports that 95% of those which are diagnosed positive with PCR actually are asymptomatic because they are exposed to, but they are not really infected. So these are some of the very subtle differences which a veterinarian should be able to understand. Now, once there is infection, there are two routes to it. Either it may result into disease or it may result into immunity. And that is the reason I have all along been saying that when you have got certain pathogens, unless a larger population doesn't get exposed to this pathogen, the immunity will not happen. And for immunity to develop, you have larger exposure. So you are likely to get explosion of people who will be suffering from some mild symptoms or exposure. And if on testing large number of people, you will keep on finding out a large number of people who are carrying virus or who are carrying a pathogen, but they are asymptomatic. Now, for immunity to happen, there are certain cells which are responsible for immunity. Especially the macrophage is important. Now, the role of macrophage we'll be discussing is mostly to process the pathogen which has entered into the body or the antigen which you have injected as vaccine. How are we seeing in a short while? And then these macrophages which become after antigen processing become what is called as antigen presenting cell. Now these antigen presenting cell now will be presenting the antigen to B lymphocytes or T lymphocytes depending upon what kind of infection it is. And then these will be producing different types of antibodies. So this is how an infection is taken care of. Now this is the antigen processing cell. As I have said that even when we say vaccine is an antigen, pathogen is also an antigen. So both are at par and will be taken care of in the same process. Right. Now antigen is internalized by macrophage, which are also called antigen presenting cell. Now the processing takes place here, and I have tried to explain that there are two types of processing that is taking place in the antigen presenting cell, and this is important to understand because the nature of immunity is going to be different in both the cases. So the nature of immunity largely depends on how the antigen which has been injected is processed inside the macrophage, and there is a whole cascade of reaction that is taking place, and while presenting this antigen to the immune cells like B lymphocytes or T lymphocytes, the body has to really recognize that this is an antigen, this is something which is foreign, and therefore complexing it with major histocompatibility complex is important. And you are all aware, you have been taught in immunology courses that major histocompatibility complex or MHCH, what's called as, has got two different classes, class 1 and class 2. And these are the one which will decide whether any cell which is entering into the body is self or non-self. If it is non-self, then there is an immune triggering, and if it is self, then there will not be any immune triggering. So this so in case of exogenous antigen, where antigen is coming prepared from outside, for example bacteria. Now bacteria by itself is a cluster of multiple antigens entering into the body. It goes inside the macrophage after internalization, and there is a process which is called as endocytosis or phagocytosis. And when it goes through endocytotic process inside the body, then it goes to the lysosome, and in lysosome it is broken down into different pieces, and an essential part of the pieces, that means those parts which are supposed to be antigenic is complex with MSC complex, and then presented on the membrane of the macrophage. That is able to be recognized by the lymphocytes, and then lymphocytes will get triggered and then will start producing antibodies. And there are two types of responses here. One is called naive response, naive B cells, B lymphocytes. Now naive means these are the B lymphocytes which have not been primed for the antigen. So this particular antigen has entered into the body for the first time, and therefore it has to really go back to its the whole antibody processing unit and produce antibodies which is specific to the presenting cell. And then this antigen presenting cell might be presenting different types of antigens. For example, if we have given a vaccine which has got 10 antigenic epitopes, then in that case the macrophage will be processing all the 10 antigenic antigenic epitopes. Each will be presented on different sets of macrophage, and then B lymphocytes will be producing different types of antibodies. So therefore you must have known that when there is infection, there could be neutralizing antibodies, there could be precipitating antibodies, there could be agglutinating antibodies, and these are all because of different antigen epitopes which have been expressed on the macrophage. So once antigen processing cell is triggering B lymphocytes, you get what is called as the response of the antibodies, and you'll get antibodies that are produced. Now here also you must remember that the response of the body to produce different antibodies is going to depend whether the infection is first time or it is a reinfection, or vaccination is for the first time or it is revaccination or boosting. So there are two types of major antibodies which will be taking care of humoral response, and there is third type which is called IgA, which is going to take care of the cellular responses, which is called as cell-mediated immunity. So the antigen presenting cell will trigger B lymphocytes. B lymphocytes will produce either IgM or IgG. And usually what happens whenever it is a naive response, initially it is IgM which is produced. And this is important for the clinicians to understand who are dealing with diseases and vaccinations. That first response is the IgM, and this response of IgM lasts for some time, and then there is switching over of the genes, and then IgM is getting now converted into IgG, so you get IgG response, and this IgG response is going to last longer. So when you are doing vaccination and when you are trying to find out whether a particular animal has responded to vaccination, picking up the right type of test is important, because if you are testing the patient in the initial stages of infection, or if you are interested in finding out if the antibody response which is there in the body is because of current infection, then you have to look for IgM. So for example, if somebody is interested in finding out whether there are antibodies circulating in blood because of, say, COVID infection, then in that case one has to go for IgM, and then only in the later stages, when the infection has wavered off, then you get a peak of IgG, and at that point of time you'll have to go for IgG. And that's why in many cases what happens, in case of medical practice, they do both. They do IgM as well as IgG. So there are different ELISA tests that are available for IgM or IgG, or different tube tests that are available. I will not go into those details because that you can find out from internet, but you have to then in that case combine. If you want to find out if it is a recent infection, in that case you have to combine the IgM test as well as the IgG test. Then after the IgG is produced, then there is also priming of T lymphocytes. Now this priming of the T lymphocytes is one which leads to what is called as memory immunity. So there is a difference that you have immunity which is current immunity which is lasting because of producing of antibodies, because B lymphocytes have converted into plasma cells, and now these plasma cells are producing come up. But then after some time, the IgG level goes down, but the body becomes immune because of the T cells which have been primed by the antigen. So these are the memory cells. So whenever there is reinfection or whenever there is revaccination, these T lymphocytes will get triggered, and then they will then complex with B lymphocytes and pass on the MHC complex, one or two depending upon whether it is endogenous or exogenous, and then trigger B lymphocytes to produce antibodies, and then the antibodies will be produced. So this is how the whole antigen processing takes place, which results in antibodies, and then antibodies will result into the memory cell. So therefore, it is not a good idea to rely on antibody estimations only, for knowing whether a patient or an animal is protected after vaccination. That you can do only in the initial stages, because IgG also has got its own half-life. Now, this is the second part of antigen processing, which is called as endogenous antigen processing. Now, this happens in mostly viruses, because viruses don't have much of their protein, and their protein is embedded with lots of polysaccharides. If you see their capsule, it has got like lot of polysaccharides, and polysaccharides are not really good antigen, and therefore body is not able to recognize the virus that is entering. So what happens in this case, when it is processed protein, because this RNA, they will integrate with the host DNA. Host DNA will produce the viral proteins, and these viral proteins then will be assembled as virus particles, and then while these are coming outside on macrophage after processing, then MHC class 1 complex is attached to it, and then the body will recognize that this is a foreign protein, and therefore antibodies are to be produced for this. So these are two different types of processes that are taking place after you do vaccination. Now let's consider what are different types of vaccines that are available, because that is also important, because the type of vaccine will define how long it is going to last. Now, gone are the days where the bacteria was harvested, or the pathogen was harvested from infection, like Jenner's experiments earlier on pox. So they did not know that attenuation and other things are important. So they would take the bacteria harvested directly from a sick patient, and then that in a smaller quantity will be injected into other people, so that they develop immunity. So here they were largely depending upon the the dose of infection. So naturally, when you have a high dose of infection, disease is likely to happen. When you have a low dose of infection, then immunity is likely to happen. So on that principle, earlier those vaccines were used, but now we don't use that kind of vaccine anymore. We use what is called as live attenuated. Now this attenuation is usually done by passaging the bacteria or the virus several times, so that it lowers its virulence factor. So the virulence is lowered, its disease causation capacity is less, but the immunogenicity remains same, and that's why these kind of vaccines are usually regarded as excellent in immunological response, because nothing is lost here. You have the pathogen particle with all the epitopes of antigens that are available, and therefore it is going to lead to antibody, and usually you'll get lots of antibodies for the membrane antigens, because it is the membrane antigens which is the major interface in the body. So when the bacteria or the virus enters into the body, it will be recognized from the membrane and not from these cytosolic kinds of proteins, because cytosolic proteins are very well protected inside. So our immunological response is not going to reach to the cytosolic protein. So it is mostly the antibodies that are taking place is because of the membrane proteins, and that's why you will see that even those clonal vaccines that are available in the market are basically for the cell membrane and antigen epitopes. The second is inactivated. Now here inactivation is done either by heating and or by killing the bacteria. And when you are killing, naturally you are going to disturb the three-dimensional structures of the proteins. And we all know that for antigenicity, three-dimensional integrity of protein is important. And while killing, you make a compromise, but many times it becomes important to use a kill vaccine because you are not able to attenuate the pathogen. It's very difficult to attenuate, and then it becomes very difficult for you to control whether the vaccination is also going to produce infection or not. But these inactivated vaccines require repeated vaccinations because the immune response is less, and therefore you have to keep on boosting so that the memory cells keep on getting stimulus that there is a danger which is there, and therefore the body has to be ready for any any antigen which is going to enter into the body. Then there are certain vaccines which are called toxites. So these are all toxins, because there are certain bacteria which do not cause disease directly, but they cause indirectly because of the toxins that are produced. And therefore, if you are able to protect against the toxins, then the disease will not happen. And the example we know is tetanus. Then you have subunit vaccines. Now in subunit vaccines, you don't want whole garbage of the antigens from the pathogen. You want only something which is very essential. And when we know when you do what is called as the sequencing of pathogens, bacterial sequencing of the entire protein, then you can predict from the bioinformatics as to what part of the bacteria or the virus is really different than the human or the mammalian or the animal genomic sequence. And if with that prediction, that there is a fraction of antigen which is more important because it is totally different, and therefore it has got an immunogenic potential, and you only pick up that subunit and produce vaccine against it. So these are all essential, but then there is a danger here that you are really relying that is the only unit which is responsible for virulence, and that is the only unit which is going to come into interface with the host responses, and therefore there is there are not a whole lot of vaccines that are available for as a subunit vaccine. Then you have conjugate vaccines, and these conjugate vaccines are basically because for those viruses which have lots of polysaccharides externally, and then their proteins are embedded. So there you want to conjugate it with some hapten, so that there is more it becomes more immunologically potent, and you can have a very severe kind of immune response. This is what I already explained to you earlier, that when you do vaccination, then you get IgM response, which is the first response, and then there is a lag period, because this lag period is required because the first response, the first peak which you get, is mostly because of the activation of B lymphocytes, and these B lymphocytes will be producing little bit of secretory kind of IgG or IgM, but a lot of them are still bound to the B lymphocytes. And then when B lymphocytes are then triggering the plasma cells, then these plasma cells are the one which are responsible for producing lots of antibodies. So you get a second response, where you have less of IgM but more of IgG, and therefore when you are testing for response of the vaccination, then you have to understand as to at what point of time you are trying to find out whether there is seroconversion. Now, seroconversion is a very common term which is used to find out whether after vaccination you have been able to protect or not. So the only way to know whether you have able to protect or not is finding out IgM in the earlier stages or IgG in the later stages. And if you have missed this part also, then there is no way, because if you're testing this, and this is what happened, some time back in the newspaper, people were saying that, the antibody IgG response, to COVID has gone, after 2 months, they don't see IgG, which is very natural, because IgG has got its own half-life, and therefore it has to go down. And the only way you would know in these cases whether the patient is protected or the person is protected or the animal is protected or not is by giving booster injection. When you give booster and if you get immediate response to the booster, then you know that the patient is or the person is immunized, and therefore there are enough of memory cells which are taking care of the revaccination, and boosting of the boosting of immunity is going to take place. So this is how we compare the primary response and the secondary response. So the earlier slide which I showed you, the first peak is called as primary response and the second peak is called as secondary response. And therefore it is usually said that except few antigens, giving a revaccination is always good. Giving a booster after some time is always good, because there, even if something has happened, because as I have explained to you that there is a lot of intricate processes that are taking place when you are doing vaccination. So one should not really think that if I am doing vaccination, the the person or the animal is going to be protected. There are going to be a lot of differences, and those differences, when we do efficiency or at the time of regulatory permissions, when the companies take, they do these under very ideal conditions, and even field trials are also done under very ideal conditions, and the ideal conditions and field conditions are different. So therefore you have to be very aware and vigilant that vaccination has really converted into seroconversion and immune population is is really correct or not. That is the responsibility of the veterinarians. Otherwise, in vaccination, it's so simple. The company is marketing vaccine, the supervisors, the livestock supervisors, attendants are doing vaccination. So what is the job of vet? Now the job of vet is to keep a tab on this data to understand what is happening in the field. That is important, and that is where I feel that the role of veterinarian becomes important in handling this kind of data and trying to understand not only at the national level but at the district and the block level, because there are lots of diversities and differences within the district, and therefore merely somebody doing at the state level is not enough. It has to be decentralized and go down to at least district level to understand what is happening in the district population as far as the seroconversion is going to take place. So this is I'll not go into detail because I've already explained to you about the primary and the secondary response, and this is again here so that when you give booster, you get a good IgG response. But if you don't give revaccination, this is the control. If you don't do revaccination, the antibody, the circulating antibody response remains same. There are also now tests that are available to understand whether the cell-mediated immune response is also going to take place. So there are some non-specific tests called as a phytohemagglutination test. Those are also done to understand whether there is lymphocyte suppression or T lymphocyte suppression. Now we come to certain important considerations because these are very common. These are very common questions which are asked. So I'm going to take another 10 minutes so that I will be able to take the questions from the audience. What should be the age of first vaccination? There is a lot of controversy around this. Now the vets should understand that there is a basic difference between ruminants and non-ruminants. Now this basic difference is because the way the embryo develops. Now in case of ruminants, embryo we all know is protected by 3 layers. The placenta is protected, the maternal and the fetal circulation is protected from 3 layers. So there is no mixing. So generally you don't have any antigen which is passing from mother to the fetus, and therefore unless there are 1 or 2 very exceptional reports on bovine viral diarrhea which has been shown to pass in certain cases even through 3 women. There is 1 or 2 exceptional cases, but it's not very absolutely it is not known whether the FMD virus can also transmit through the transplacental but let's say in a larger scope, bacterial pathogens, antibodies and the viruses cannot pass from the maternal circulation to the fetal circulation. But it is also known that by 153 days or 155 days, the fetus is competent to respond to antigens. And these things they have done by injecting the antigens, inside the embryo when the animal is pregnant, and then they found that there was good antibody response. So from that, it has been now established that the immunocompetency as far as the embryo is concerned is there from day 51, 53, and then when it is born, although it may be devoid of any antibodies because of failure of transmission of antibodies, but it is fully competent. But then another factor which you need to consider is maternal antibodies, because in case of non-ruminants, lot of maternal antibodies would also be passing through placenta, and lots of IgA type of antibodies will also be passing through colostrum even in non-ruminants. So even in dogs, even in pigs, horses, as well as in human, the colostrum when it is given, IgA is the predominant immunoglobulin which will be passing and which will be absorbed and will be giving what is called as through galt, it is getting circulated and will give protective immunity, passive immunity for certain period of time to the young bird. Whereas in case of ruminant, it is the IgG1 which is predominantly present in the colostrum, and lots of it is absorbed when it is fed at the right time. And these maternal antibodies will be interfering if you are doing vaccination very early. So therefore, the age of vaccination is going to depend on, number one, whether colostrum has been given, number two, whether the mother has been exposed. So I give you an example. Suppose there is a farm where repeatedly every 6 months, very honestly, you are doing FMD vaccination. So say after 3 years of period, lots of antibodies against FMD will be there in colostrum. And therefore, if this colostrum is fed to the calves, those calves will also get good amount of maternal antibodies which will remain in circulation for a longer period of time. So this point needs to be taken into consideration while deciding the first vaccination, and that holds true even in case of dogs, even in case of cats and other animals. Now, exact pinpoint as to when it has to be given, that I would leave it to your own judgment, because there is so much diversity of how the vaccination is taking place and how successful is going to be the vaccination. So age of vaccination depends on presence of maternal antibodies, and therefore in Western countries, I know when we were doing studies there in Canada, this was a very common practice to collect randomly colostrum and quantify antibodies against different pathogens, and depending upon that, the vaccination or the frequency of vaccination was decided by the government. So similar approach I think also is needed in case of ruminants, whereas in case of non-ruminants, at least some data should be accumulated on how is the seroconversion and the response. And what has happened in India, that generally the companies which are marketing the vaccines here, they don't share the Indian data, and therefore vets should insist that the companies which are marketing vaccines, especially in pet animals, should also be able to give you the data on this particular aspect, because now we know that anti-rabies vaccination, distemper vaccination, all corona, rotavirus infections is now different, because 10 years back we were not doing lots of vaccination. Now vaccination percentage has really gone up, and now in this change scenario, what should be the schedule of vaccination, that I think needs to be fixed up. And I think the institutes, if there are academicians and researchers who are today listening to my presentation, I think should take up this particular aspect of studies to really find out what is the most suitable schedule for ruminants. Another thing which I have always wondered is why we don't do vaccination through colostrum. Because if by 153 days the calf is really immunocompetent, can we also transfer certain antigens into the calf body, so that it also gets protected, especially for those infections which take place in the early stages of life. The next important consideration is, can we boost colostrum for immune response? Because earlier days, I know, when I was consulting Chitri Dairy in Maharashtra, there were lots of problems related foot and mouth disease, because we were doing vaccination regularly, but still we were getting cases in young calves, and we all know that in young calves, especially when the animals have been imported from outside, they are very much prone for diseases like FMD. So we were getting mortality. So there we thought that probably the colostrum is not containing enough of antibodies against FMD. So the protection which should have been there during the period from birth to the first vaccination is not taking place. So at that we started doing vaccination of pregnant cows. So repeated vaccination with FMD, and then we could find that we had lots of antibodies in colostrum, and then we could get protection in the calf. So this is called as an immune colostrum. So this is quite common in other countries, where if they have a localized problems in a herd, then in that case they do the hyperimmunization of the cow, produce hyperimmune colostrum, and that colostrum is fed to the cow. Now, should vaccination be done when animal is suspected to be sick? Of course not. When animal is suspected to be sick, it should not be vaccinated, because already lots of the amount of antigen which you are going to inject is going to be much smaller than the antigen which has already gone inside. So there is no need. But what can be done here in case of epidemic is you can separate out those which are infected, those are exposed, and those which are not exposed. And depending upon the status of the clinical symptoms, you can decide whether only treatment is to be carried out, or only vaccination is to be carried out, or or you want to wait for some time, so that the infected would develop immunity by themselves. Can vaccination be given to pregnant animals? Well, it's a very controversial question. There are people who say no, you should not you should not do in case of pregnant animals, especially in advanced or third trimester of pregnancy. But let me tell you, I have done vaccination myself in large number of animals in the last trimester of pregnancy, and it's not going to harm the fetus, because a simple reason I have told you earlier, that there are three, and the antigen which I'm going to inject is not going to go to the embryo. So the danger which we talk about, abortion, if we do vaccination at an early stage, is not really true. I have done vaccination of pregnant cows, not only for FMD, but also for other infections like H. pylori and E. coli and others. And it's a very common practice even in other countries to vaccinate pregnant animals to produce hyperimmune response. Coming to monogastric, there of course you need to be slightly vigilant. Avoid vaccination when it is in advanced pregnancy or during the calving stage. Can vaccination and antibodies be given simultaneously? Well, this is something which you have to worry about, because you don't want the external antigen to go inside, and as well as antibodies to go inside and form complexes with the antigen, and you neutralize the antigen and also neutralize the antibodies. So the efficacy of both will be compromised. So you have to really decide whether you would like to give vaccination first and then wait for some time for the immune response to come, or you want to give antibodies first, wait for some time for antibodies to combine with the antigen which is already present inside, and then go for vaccination, so that you get a larger secondary response. That depends on the clinical picture of each case, but nothing in general can be said about it. Now, can multiple vaccination be done at the same time? This is another question which is answered. We have 7-in-1, 3-in-1, 2-in-1. I think God knows 9-in-1 will come later on. So we have got whole lot of mixtures of vaccines which are being combined. So there is always a question whether those vaccines are really useful or they are going to cause harm. I have searched a lot of literature on this topic, and they all say that it's not a good idea. I mean, to combine lots of vaccine together, because when you're combining lots of vaccine, you are also dividing the immune compartment. So a part of the immune compartment will respond to A, B, C, D, E, and therefore the immune response to each vaccine is going to be less than what it would be if you had given single. Therefore, in such cases where you feel that it is inevitable, it is logistically, it is better because you don't want the owners to come to you quite often, and then the compliance rate is going to be very less. In that case, if you're combining, then be sure that you have to do booster injections very honestly at the right time. Doing boosting injection either very early is harmful or delayed is also harmful, because delay is going to have a window where the the animal is going to be more susceptible to the disease. This is one paper I could dig off where they have shown that when you use a lot of vaccine, multiple vaccines, so they, basically in this research they have compared single vaccination to multiple vaccination, and then they have studied what is the immune response, and they found that when you use single vaccine, then your immune response is good. Whereas when you are doing multiple vaccines, then there is lymphocyte there is immunosuppression of the lymphocytes, and this immunosuppression is there well for around 21 to 30 days, and then it catches up, and then you get a good immune response. Doing revaccination within that period is important, because if you are doing only polyvalent vaccine and then you are not repeating it, then you are depending on sub-protective levels of antibodies, which is not good for the animal. Another question generally which is asked is, should deworming be done before vaccination? And this I found very common with pet practitioners. They always insist that you deworm first and then we will only do vaccination. I have tried to go through literature and then found that there is no robust evidence available. Deworming is not bad. I mean, both are essential. Deworming is also essential, and vaccination is also. But whether it should be done, in a consequence simultaneously or one after other is a question which has not yet been settled. But I could get few research papers published where they have shown that deworming before vaccination doesn't lead to any different response than the response which will get with vaccination. If there is worm infestation, don't wait for vaccine time to happen. Deworm it at the right time, and don't wait for vaccination for deworming. There are practitioners, I know there are quite a few practitioners in USA as well as in Canada where they give deworming and the vaccination at the same time in the same visit. So there is no need to call the pet owner repeatedly. You give first do deworming doses and then come third time and then I'll do vaccination. Now we'll talk about very briefly in 5 minutes. I'll talk about the disease control programs. Now here we should understand that disease control program has got 3 levels. Number 1, we want to control disease at the individual animal level or at the farm level. Then we want to disease control. We want to control outbreaks of the disease in a population or cluster of populations, and then we want to eradicate the disease. Now all these 3 will have very different approaches. If you want to control disease in individual animal vaccination is enough. So if I've got 3 animals, and if I do them vaccination, 3 cattle, I'm doing vaccination regularly, I'm protecting my animals. But that does not mean that I'm protecting outbreak. Outbreak may still happen, and because of outbreak, these animals which have been vaccinated might get some mild infection, but will not show very severe infection. So there the approach is different. But when you want to control the disease outbreaks, then the population immunity or the herd immunity is important. Now this is COVID, and I say COVID has lots of given COVID has given a lot of new terminologies, and one of the new thing which has come up is human population is being called as herd now. I mean herd immunity, even in human being, whereas this was the word which was reserved for animals, because animals are herded, those are populations or herds or flocks. So now herd immunity, then it becomes important here. Whereas if you want to eradicate the disease, then important thing here is you don't want that to remain in the patient, get rid of the population. To eradicate FMD, you would like to eradicate the virus, or you want to eradicate the pathogen from the population. And that you can do only when a very large population remains immune at the same level. So this is important to understand, that when you are talking of herd immunity, herd immunity must will happen only when at least 52 to 55% of the population becomes immune. And this immunity they will get either from vaccination or they'll get from exposure to infection. Suppose for COVID there is no vaccine available. So how the population will get immunity? The population will get immunity when only they will get exposed to a low dose of virus. And how they will get exposed to low dose of virus? When it will be open, like when you allow viruses to transmit from one person to another person in a regulated manner, in a very regulated manner, so that the dose of infection is less, then in that case a very large population will get immunity, and then the outbreaks or the cases will come down, and the outbreak the curve will flatten. Whereas if you want to eradicate, then in that case, like polio, you'll have to do vaccination of all the susceptible population on the same day, like it is being done in polio, that entire children up to 6 years of age is vaccinated on the same day globally, because then the immune status is at par, and then the virus or the pathogens will not be able to multiply, and therefore the disease will be eradicated. So in case of FMD, if our goal is to eradicate FMD, then it is not possible, because it's not possible to vaccinate entire susceptible cattle population. So what Government of India is doing a disease control program in a clustered manner, so that you pick up the clusters which are very hot areas and start regulating the movement, but vaccinate maximum number of animals so that you get herd immunity, and then the infection transmission is not taking place, because then you will ensure that any susceptible animal which is entering into that population is vaccinated before it enters, and any unvaccinated animal is not going out of the immune population to outside. So this is how then you can regulate the the outbreaks. So eradication of disease, I have already covered that you need here immune population at the same level of immunity throughout the susceptibility spectrum. So if you want to do in FMD, you need to control this in pig, you need to control this in goat, you need to control in sheep, cattle, buffalo, so all animals should be vaccinated at the same time, and that will only become possible if you have got an oral vaccine or a nasal vaccine. Then even non-technical persons, like it is being done in polio, volunteers just put few drops. So in the similar manner, FMD vaccinations would also become possible, and then we will able to control this disease. But also remember that when you eradicate a disease, keeping the eradication status of the country is more expensive than controlling the disease, because you have to be very vigilant. You have to keep a stock of vaccines already available, because after some time, when you have eradicated the disease, the population becomes non-immune, and if by any chance, unfortunately, if the pathogen comes, then it will create havoc. So you need to be more vigilant in that case. Now, in case of brucellosis, again, there are lots of questions which are being asked. The picture is still not very clear as to how this Brucella control program is going to happen. Whether we are going to do testing. If we are going to do testing, then in that case, what are we going to do with cows that are positive? Are we, we cannot like it is happening in areas. We cannot, quarantine becomes very difficult, although our law says that any outbreak or any infectious disease, if there is a infected case, that infected case has to be isolated. There are no isolation facilities and quarantine facilities. Who is going to report? These are all very complex questions at the national level, when logistically it becomes very difficult. So that we see even in Brucella. Therefore, there is a need to really sit down and critically plan how Brucella is going to be, Brucella control program is going to be implemented. I think one of the component in Brucella control program is identifying herds that are having abortions. And those are the herds which will be picked up as hotspots, and then vaccination will be done. But then who is going to report abortion? How the report will go to the right competent authority? How is going to be the response? Is again a complex question, because you can't expect farmers to keep on or the West to keep on eye on every abortion and then keep on reporting. So some out of box thinking has to take place, and one of the solution which I have given to a few insurance companies is that they should come out with an insurance for abortion. When say charge just 10 rupees, 20 rupees for covering abortion, and with that any abortion that is taking place, they can take a photograph of the fetus and load it, and then from the photograph we'll be able to know whether it is the which trimester of pregnancy abortion has taken place, and then that information can go to the competent authorities, and competent authorities then can go and visit that farm, collect samples, find out whether it was Brucella, and then carry out vaccination. So such kind of out of box programs with with the current digital technologies need to be developed. So this is all I wanted to convey today. So thanks a lot. I appreciate the organizers for giving me this opportunity to to share my ideas with the veterinary brothers. Thank you.
एक जगह जाके
Sir.
Yeah.
Only one question is there, that how much time it takes to develop herd immunity?
See, development of herd immunity will depend on what is called as the replication factor of the pathogen, or not, which is talked about for COVID. And then number two, whether you are going for containment. If you're going for containment, naturally you are going to lock up even the virus, so the transmission is intervened. The transmission is not going to take place. But roughly, now most of the epidemiologists I have heard, they say that you need at least 52% of the population to be exposed, exposed to the pathogen. They may not show any symptom. They may suffer from a very mild, episode of, say, some symptoms like, slight fever, etc. And then they become immune. So at least 52%. And then there are certain pathogens where the transmission rate is not is not really very high, or it is highly localized. For example, in case of brucellosis, their herd immunity will take place only if you have, say, 80% or 85% of the population. That is so it is not a function of time. Herd immunity is function of how many susceptible population you are able to immunize, either by vaccination or by exposing with the pathogens.
Okay, sir. One more small query, sir. That what should be the age of vaccination in pups? When we should start? Normally we start with 45 to 60 days. Is it appropriate as per your view or not?
I think 45 to 60 days. I think one question, we should ask to the pet owner, and if you can get an answer for that, then you can slightly postpone it to 90 days if mother has been regularly vaccinated.
Oh,
Okay, if mother has been regularly vaccinated, and if the pup, and if there are not large number of pups, because then if there are large number of pups, the colostrum intake is going to be less. So if that information is known, then I think you can slightly delay it, or 45 to 60 days. Anything after 21 days generally is better. After 21 days, you should wait, because maternal antibodies, general reports are that you have enough of antibodies up to 45 days, and after 45 days starts wavering. So that is the time. So I'll say anywhere between 60 to 90 days.
okay, sir. There is one query from Dr. Susoman Rai.
Sir, good morning.
Good morning.
Sir, first of all, sir, normally in the field, the things that if you're giving more vaccination, like this, that is, if you're giving the more doses of the vaccination, the protection will be more. Is it right? No, wrong, no, sir. They are giving
wrong.
what?
It's
They are
wrong.
giving booster. Yes.
It's wrong, because immunity is not really dependent on the dose of antigens, or the dose of proteins that you are injecting the body. There is a lot of multiplication which is taking place inside the macrophage. So that is only you are giving for priming. So I mean, instead of giving 1 ml, if you are giving 5 ml, you are not going to get a high response. That's number one.
Yeah.
Number two, very bad. And I have gone through one report which has come up in in Veterinary Medical Association in USA, and they have pointed out that the current epidemic of CRF, chronic renal failure, as well as lots of liver problems, have started from the time when polyvalent vaccines have, because what when you do vaccinations, you are taking plasma cells, and those plasma cells also produce what is called as amyloid proteins. And these amyloid proteins have got a tendency to go and clog into liver cells as well as kidney cells. And therefore, you are likely to get amyloid kidneys and amyloid liver, leading to, either liver failure or chronic renal failure. So this is one of the dangers which we should realize. And this we have seen even in horses that are used for hyperimmunization for snake venom, etc. When you do repeated vaccinations, you get lots of amyloid proteins which is circulating in the body. And those amyloid proteins are not good, because they would precipitate into the glomeruli and cause chronic renal failure. So it's not a good idea to keep on doing vaccination unnecessarily.
Sure. Sir, another question. Now, Government of India has declared to eradicate the FMD. They have already started the vaccination, but normally the FMD, there are so many substances there, and cross immunity not occur from one strain to other.
Yeah.
So they have given the vaccines from one sources. Is it a things possible to eradicate the disease FMD, sir?
I think when an antigen is approved for vaccine program, usually government of India would look into it and find and approve its suitability. So every country is going to keep this as homogeneous as possible. That even if there are 5 companies which are producing vaccine, the antigen profile matches with the country's profile of the outbreaks. I don't think I think that is not going to make any difference. But mutations in FMD is going to make a difference. If there is mutation, there is a subtype, and if that subtype is antigenically different, you are likely to get epidemics and not complete protection. So one has to be very vigilant in case of FMD, like influenza. Even in they have to change the vaccine. The vaccine, the antigen profile of the vaccine, because there are new types that are coming up. So in the same manner, even for FMD, we'll have to very stout surveillance program, collections of the material from the outbreaks, processing it to find out how different it is from the current antigen profile of the vaccine. So these are all very intricate components of the program that need to be integrated with the entire program. But unfortunately, what happens whenever we talk of disease control program, then we talk only of vaccination, then forget about everything, which is not a good thing.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. You have enlightened in all aspects of vaccine. Now I invite Dr. S.L. Ali, Professor and Head, Veterinary College, Andhra, to propose vote of thanks, sir.
Sir, excuse me, sir. Sorry for the interruption.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. It gives me immense pleasure to propose vote of thanks on this occasion of organization of this webinar on science behind vaccination and disease control in India. On behalf of Chhattisgarh Kamdenu Vishwavidyalaya, I express heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Abdul Samad sir, an eminent scientist, an excellent academician, former dean of Bombay Veterinary College, Mumbai, for providing valuable and extremely relevant information during this challenging time of pandemic on vaccinology. We all, the faculty members of the college, especially from the Department of Veterinary Medicines, are grateful to our Honorable Vice Chancellor of CGKV, Dr. N.P. Dakshinkar sir, for giving an opportunity and guiding us for organizing this webinar. We are also thankful to our beloved Dean of the College of Veterinary Science and the Chief Organizer of this webinar, Dr. S.K. Tiwari, for all-time support and motivation for conducting this organization. On behalf of Vishwavidyalaya, I am also thankful to all the participants for their valuable presence and support during this challenging time of COVID-19 pandemic. I am also thankful to all the heads of the department and the faculty members and also non-teaching staff for their valuable presence, contribution and valuable support for organization of this webinar. Once again, I am thankful to all, one and all. Stay safe, take care. Jai Hind. May I again request our Honorable Vice Chancellor for final comments and concluding remarks. Sir, please.
Thank you, sir, very much for your vibrant presentation. But through such a national webinars, I feel we should take certain messages. And in this context, I just wanted to elaborate on what should be the take-home message out of today's national webinar. The first and the most important thing is that this presentation is really an eye-opener for all of us, because up till now, what has been inculcated in all of us is that the preventive vaccination in pregnant animals is contraindicated. Whereas it is very clear that 1 in 1,000 case may suffer with the abortion if the pregnant animals are vaccinated, but it is beneficial animals so that a hyperimmune colostrum is created, that is of the most important take-home message. Then another most important thing is that the multivalent vaccination or the polyvalent vaccines, as far as possible, they should be avoided. And the reason is quite elaborated by Dr. Samad, that it may lead to chronic renal failure, particularly in case of the canines. But to me, it is since long, I always contemplate over one issue, that as regards the canine practitioners or canine practice is concerned, even till today, we have failed to take out or draw a clear-cut preventive vaccination calendar. And I am of the opinion that such forums should come forward and draw a very clear-cut preventive vaccination calendar for the canine population. Because across the country, we find that everybody has his own conceptions as per his whims, whatever may be the reason. People go on vaccinating the animals, even if many times it is not required at all. And sometimes it is done at a very wrong age. Meaning the end result is that, because we have attended many cases, in spite of the vaccination, you will find that the dog is presented with a complaint of distemper. So it is very, very painful to address such issues. So for this reason, sir, I request that we should come out with a very clear-cut vaccination schedule or a calendar in case of the canines. That is my perception, that we are lacking in that, and because of this, many times lot of confusion is created in the pet owners. Sometimes he feels that whether that is practitioner is right, or he is right, or somebody else is right. So if we all join hands together and draw a clear-cut program, I feel that we should not be landing in a very miserable situation. Otherwise, many times we have to face such queries. Once again, on behalf of the Chhattisgarh Kamdhenu Vishwavidyalaya, I thank you so much for your very distinguished presentation and enlightening all of us about the science behind the vaccination. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I just want to add,
Please, sir.
I just want to add, on what Dr. Dakshinkar has said. See, number one, drawing of, schedule of vaccination has to be evidence-based. It should not be anecdotal. I have done it. We say I have done it, and there is no, I don't see, any harmful effect. It should not be, that should not be the approach. It should be evidence-based. And the starting point, Dr. Sushavan Rai is also here. He is also an eminent physician, an eminent, academician. The starting point could be, there is a notification on vaccination schedule and all issues related with vaccination, published by Wasawa. Okay, so that you can take as a benchmark. And then from there, depending upon the diversity which we have, you can draw a research plan, and then maybe, a multi-centric, like, few colleges coming together, approach the companies that are marketing vaccines. And then, ask, and then tell them that we would like to evaluate, number one, current vaccines. Are they really good? Are they really protecting? Number one. I mean, what is the, response to those vaccination? And whatever they have, schedule they have given, is that schedule, tested in India, or they have, brought this, from, say, USA or UK. So all these questions need to be asked. So, rightly, Dr. Dakshinkar has said that a forum, where 4 or 5 eminent people can come together ask these questions and then develop a good program of reviewing the vaccines in pet animals, I think would serve the interest of the veterinary profession as well as the public.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you one and all for joining
Thank you.
this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Congratulations, sir.